The Charlotte Podcast Festival is presented by Blumenthal Performing Arts, the Queen City Podcast Network, Eclecs Creative Agency, and WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the home of acclaimed podcast Charlotte Talks, She Says, The List, Amplifier, Southbound, and FAQ City. Learn more about WFAE and our latest podcast, Work It, at WFAE.org.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth week of the Charlotte Podcast Festival. My name is Brian Baltashevich from the Queen City Podcast Network, and I'm your moderator and participant for this hour of the festival. Of course, this is Charlotte's first podcast festival. It's presented by WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the Queen City Podcast Network, Blumenthal Performing Arts, and Eclecs Creative Agency. This hour session is all about monetizing your podcast. So for a lot of us, the goal of podcasting is maybe to turn it from a hobby into maybe making a little bit of money with it. And that's kind of, what we're going to talk about. What does it take to monetize a podcast? Is it just pure listenership? Is it just pure numbers? What exactly goes into monetizing your podcast? At the Queen City Podcast Network, we were able to attach a title sponsorship to the network almost 2 years ago now, and the money that we've gotten from our Untitled sponsor, ORTHOCAROLINA, has allowed us to run the network as a business and as an operation in Charlotte that it actually does turn a little bit of a profit that we put right back into the network to help it continue to grow. But the network does work. Our other panelist I'm here today is Stacy Stims. And Stacy, I'm coming your way with the video. There, Stacy. So Stacy has a very niche podcast. She is a longtime Charlotte radio pro and is the host of the podcast Diabetes Connections. So she will tell you a little bit about what and that's about, but she serves a very specific community and has been able to monetize her podcast by serving that community as well. So Stacy, let's start it here. My guest, can you tell us about your podcast and at what point and how you were able to monetize your very specific audience?
Sure thing. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. As Brian said, I come from a traditional broadcasting background. I worked in local TV news and radio news for many years. My last stop was a decade at WBT Radio, which is here in Charlotte, did morning news there for 10 years, the morning show. And that experience was really relevant for my monetization in podcasting. I'll talk about that a little bit more. I started Diabetes Connections. I'm sorry, I'm at that horrible age where I sometimes can see with my reading glasses and sometimes I can't see. Don't get old, it's terrible. So I started Diabetes Connections in the summer of 2015. And I didn't start it with the intent to make money. I started it because I was really passionate about the subject. I was a huge podcast listener. I've been listening, since the mid 2000s when you plugged your iPod into the computer and downloaded the shows into your iPod. But I wasn't hearing the show I wanted to hear. So I made it. And I hope that a lot of you have that same kind of story. My show is for and about people who have type 1 diabetes, which used to be called juvenile diabetes. We've kind of morphed into a show that's for people who use insulin as more technology becomes available, but that's not too relevant for this discussion. I started talking about sponsorship and moving into that line of thinking about 3 months after I launched the show. Once I got my feet under me, once I had a good response and started to move forward, I realized that the niche that I was in was an awful lot like the talk radio background that I had come from. And I thought, I can sell this. I know how to do this from being in talk radio for all those years. And so I did. So I sold my first sponsorship probably about 6 months in, and we started running ads for them for my first full year, which was 2016. And I have been selling ads on the show ever since. I'm in the middle of selling for 2021 because you got to do it for my type of people, which are medical and pharma companies and some other folks. I have to do it while they're setting their budgets. So I have a whole list of how to do it, what to think about, and I'm really excited to be here. But I don't want to launch just right in, Brian, unless you tell me to go ahead.
Let me let's see, do a little bit more housekeeping, Stacy, and then well, I'll come back to you. If you do have questions about monetizing your podcast, throw them in the chat room. We are monitoring the chat, and we'll get to your questions as they fit into the flow of the conversation. Please do leave your microphones muted during the course of the conversation as well. A reminder, this session will be recorded and made available over email later this month. Make sure you check your emails, your spam, your junk, your promotions folders if you don't see it right away to receive this session recording at the end of the festival later this month, which is basically towards the end of this week. The full list of sessions, there's 1 week of sessions left. The full list of sessions is available at the Charlotte Podcast Festival website, charlottepodcastfestival.com. And if you are sharing about the sessions on social media, please use the hashtag CLTPodcastFest. CLTPodcastFest. That's the hashtag used on Twitter and Instagram and all the socials. If you like what you're doing here, you may have noticed that the entire festival, all 40-some sessions throughout the month of October, were free. You didn't have to pay a dime to get any of this information for us. We do want to know you can support the festival by purchasing a cool Charlotte Podcast Festival t-shirt from the website at charlottepodcastfestival.com. So if you like what you're doing, feel free to spend a couple bucks on a t-shirt. It'll help us kind of offset the cost of putting the show on. So Stacy, so you mentioned that when you set out, when you launched your podcast, was your intention to monetize it, or were you kind of strictly just about the message out of the gate?
A little bit of both. As I said, I really wasn't thinking about it. I wanted to get through the first few weeks. I was coming from a radio background, but I was really nervous about the technical stuff. Again, this was 5.5 years ago. I actually took 6 months longer to start the show because I was terrified of the technology. And I know you all have covered that really well. It was so much easier than I thought. But about 3 months in, I realized that it was time to monetize. And I'll tell you what, I've seen already questions about numbers. And I promise we will talk about specific numbers. I can't stand when presentations like this are done and it's like, woo, amorphous stuff. I'm gonna talk about numbers, but I want to do that later because I want to cover some concepts first. But I want to talk about, I will talk about audience size. I will talk about how much I think you should ask for, all that good stuff. And I did see a really good question to address, which is what the heck are we talking about with sponsorships? Now, everybody uses this in different ways. So I'll be clear. When I say sponsor, I mean, give me money for a commercial. That's what I say. When my show is sponsored by, it means you're paying me to talk about your product. Those are my partnerships, and you can define them how you want. But a sponsor for me is not necessarily what it may mean for other shows. Podcasting is weird, isn't it? We've kind of popped up with our own language and our own terms. Brian, does that jibe with what you all do in the network? Are sponsors people who are paying you for commercials?
Yeah, absolutely. What we did when we approached ORTHOCAROLINA, I mean, actually they came to us first and said, heck, how can we get involved? But when we pitched the sponsorship to them, we pitched the sponsorship at several different levels, right? So there was the title sponsorship, which was the one they ended up going for. And then there was kind of smaller sponsorships, including being involved in a certain type of podcast, whether it was news or entertainment or whatever, or just being involved in an individual sponsorship. So we gave them several options to choose from. They went for the title sponsorship, and then we were just about actually to take the network and the individual sponsorships and individual spot opportunities on the road at the end of February, and then of course everything shut down in March, and so we sort of circled the wagons a little bit, and we're kind of waiting to see a little bit what happens with COVID, before we start to actually seek sponsorship again. But fortunately, right now, what we get every month from ORTHOCAROLINA as the title sponsor is enough to keep us afloat at the moment.
All right, can I launch into like a little bit of a plan here? If anybody.
Yeah,
yes?
absolutely.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
All right. So I did a little bit of an outline of what kind of led me to get the sponsorships. And there are different, when we talk about monetization, there are different ways to do this. I'm not going to talk about Patreon or audience participation today because I don't do that. People with diabetes need to buy insulin and other stuff. They don't need to pay for my show. So I don't do Patreon. There are other ways to get sponsorship, but here I want to talk about advertising, maybe some underwriting, which is another way to say, you know, they're supporting our show without necessarily doing a full commercial. So first, remember, you are selling your audience. You are not selling your show. Your content has to be good, your quality has to be good, but honestly, all advertisers care about is your audience. They don't care how funny you are. They just care if your audience thinks you're funny. You need to know who your audience is, and you can do that a few ways. You can kind of guess if you are a part of your audience. I mean, I am a part of the diabetes community. My son lives with type 1. My husband lives with type 2. I know this community inside and out. So I'm a part of it. I know who my audience is. If you don't, and I did this anyway about a year in, do a survey. A lot of the podcasting hosting companies will allow you to use a template. They'll help you. But guys, a survey is so easy. You can do it on Google Docs. You can do it through, you know, SurveyMonkey or whatever. Find something free, put it out there. The best thing you can know about your audience is education level and income level. You can keep it anonymous. You know, they don't need to, I know a lot of people would be uncomfortable, you know, putting a salary range out there, that sort of thing. But I think it's really important that you know those two things because that's what advertisers want to know. Age range is also very important, you know, assuming your show is, you know, depending on what your show is about, you're probably not getting a lot of 12-year-olds, but maybe, you know, so find out how many people are in each age group. Once you have that, then you can really start to build. Then you need to brainstorm. But before you get too, you know, tied into who's going to advertise with me, you really need to make a plan. It doesn't need to be too involved. My first plan was scribble on a piece of paper. You don't need like a big white paper business school thing. Nobody's going to see this. This is for you. And in that plan, you know, you need to think about things like Brian already mentioned, setting up pricing and packages, making a media kit. That can be very simple, but you need it. Your time management. What are you going to give up that you're doing right now in order to create this sales package and go out and sell? Because once you pull the trigger on this, you are now in a business. You are no longer in a hobby. You might think I'm going to dabble in this. We'll see where it goes. But it's really different. If you're going to try to monetize your podcast, you have to treat it like a business. So figure out what you're going to give up, you know, a couple hours a week. You don't have to give up your life, but maybe you're going to stop blogging, or maybe you're going to stop going out on Thursday nights, or maybe you're going to, you know, do something that gives you a little bit of extra time. Then identify which or what kind of sponsors to go after. And just, you know, brainstorm, make a list, that kind of thing. We can talk more about how to find them a little bit later on. Yeah, sorry, the comments are popping up. I like that. You need to stop Netflix. Well, maybe just one night or one episode. Create a timeline. I need deadlines. I need structure. I'm a very haphazardy, messy person. You can kind of see behind me, there's a lot of stuff thrown in. But if I don't set a time and a date, it doesn't happen. So when you start this out, okay, I'm going to start approaching sponsors on November 10th or whatever, you know, just make a plan and try to stick with it that way. And what are your deadlines for your sponsorship? Are you going to have rolling deadlines? You'll accept sponsorship at any time until you're full? Or will you say, okay, I need, at least outwardly, I need to tell these people that they need to get their act together by January 30th, 2021, if they want to start advertising by March 15th. Things like that. These people you're going to approach for advertising are used to all of this stuff. They are not used to people calling and saying, whatever you want to do is fine with me. That's not how it works. You can hang up the phone and go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe this just happened. I hate sales. But when you're talking to them, you have to speak their language. And so these things are really important to have in front of you and written out. Excuse me. And when Brian mentioned the packages, that should be part of your plan too. So I have 4 slots in my show for sponsors. I started with 2 and I kind of added them. Now, how to add that is a whole other presentation, right? How to make it sound so your show isn't full of commercials. There's many, many ways to do this. Some people start and you have to get through 10 minutes of commercials before you get to their show. If you're Joe Rogan, go for it. If you're not a great idea, because people are going to tune out, or worse, they're going to skip the commercials. And we all think in podcasting, oh, it's fine to skip the commercials, but your advertisers don't want them to do that. You need to find creative ways to keep attention and pace out the ads in your show so they make sense. So plan that out, and then you can have different pricing for different spots in the show. That's up to you. Are you going to also say that they can have social media with you? Are you going to blog for them? When we go back to being in person, will you do appearances for them? That sort of thing. These are all things you can throw in your package. Write a pitch. Write your pitch. 3 sentences. Here's my show. Here's my audience. I'd love for you to be a part of it. You're not sending them your deck. You're not doing the whole presentation. This should be a pitch that you can send in an Instagram DM or Twitter or an easy email. And then if they're interested, they can get back to you. And the reason I say write it out and keep it quick is because that way you're just going to cut and paste it. Because hopefully, if you're looking for 4 sponsors, you might have to reach out to 20 people. Make it really easy on yourself. And think about legal. If you don't already have a business or an attorney, that's okay. But just think about it. Do a quick Google search. Think about what you're on the hook for. And be prepared to write out a contract. Most of my sponsors give me a contract because in pharma, I'm a vendor. It's bananas, but that's how they look at me. So I have a contract that I use with my non-medical people, but my medical people send me one. I'm talking a mile a minute. I'm really glad this is recorded. I told Brian at the beginning he needed to jump in on this if I'm talking too much.
No,
Am I doing okay?
You're doing just great. Yep.
All right. So how do I find these sponsors? How do I sell to them? All right. So you have to start networking relentlessly. Selling is really, really hard. It's really hard. It stinks. It's really nice when you get the checks. Everything else about it is awful. I'm sorry, I'm not a salesperson. But when I worked in radio, we always noticed the salespeople always drove the nicest cars, and now I know why. So don't get discouraged. Work your network. If you're in a niche, this gets easier. One of the things that I did was I looked at the conferences that were in my niche or magazines, and you can see who advertises. Who's going to those conferences? Who's advertising in those magazines? Who is popping up on ads when you visit websites that are similar to what you want to do? Those are your potential advertisers. Then you have to find the marketing people, and then you have to find a way to get in touch with them. So it's a lot of who do I know, who do I know? If you are an organic part of your network, of your niche, this is a lot easier. It's also why it's a lot easier to start selling once you have 6 months or 1 year or 2 years under your belt of your podcast, because your podcast becomes its own community. And I can ask people now who listen to my podcast, hey, what are you guys using to keep your Dexcom on these days? Like, what's the latest and greatest in carrying all your diabetes crap around? Who can I talk to, that would be interested in advertising on the show? So ask and ask and ask. I don't put my pricing in the initial pitch. I do put it in the deck, and Brian's going to talk a little bit more, I think, about sponsorship decks a little bit later on. But I do put my pricing in the media kit, the media deck. We call it different things. But you don't need to put it in your emails, because chances are that first person you email is not going to be the person that you're speaking to eventually. And then this is super high level. We're just zipping through everything. Let's just briefly talk numbers, and then Brian will go to the pitch, and then we can answer questions.
Sure.
Okay, let's talk numbers. I have, let me tell you a story. When I worked at WBT, those of you who are from Charlotte, it is the news talk station here in town. Many of you in the United States have this station in your town. WSB in Atlanta, I don't even know what it would be in New York, 1010 Winds maybe, but everybody has one of these heritage radio stations that, you listen to if you're old enough for school closings way back in the day, and now probably has Rush Limbaugh or, conservative people screaming all day long on the radio. But in the morning, there's a news show. This type of radio station is generally one of the top billers in the market. It makes the most money. And why is that? Not because it has such a big audience, because frankly, that audience is getting smaller every year, right? Those people are getting older. Fewer people are listening to the radio in that group. I mean, radio listening is not too far down as far as I know in the US. But why do they make so much money? because that audience, while it's this big, has this much money in the marketplace. They have money to spend. So if you're listening to WBT, you're going to be hearing advertising for like Diamonds Direct and cruises and whatever, realtors and high-end home improvement. If you're listening to a radio station that has a lot of younger listeners, they have this many listeners, but they have this much money and they're doing vitamin ads, or whatever they can get. So it's really different, and you need to approach your podcast the same way. When you're selling your audience, hopefully you have a valuable audience. If you're a couple of guys sitting around talking about movies, your audience isn't that valuable. First of all, those guys are already listening to 10 movie podcasts, so it's tough to get an audience. But at the same time, they're younger, they're less loyal to brands. These are the shows that you hear, and we'll get more into this too, like the Blue Apron, the Casper, the Stamps.com, all of those ads. If you have a niche audience that is hard to reach, you can charge more, and you should. Because you have found those people, you've gathered them together, you've done the work, and now you're serving them up for a sponsor. It's a situation where you should not be afraid, if you have a valuable audience, to ask for more money. Okay, so having said that, everybody always wants to know the numbers. What were your numbers like when you got an audience? It's so funny. I have heard since I started podcasting, that you need 5,000 listeners per episode per week to make money. And I had a guy who called me about 6 weeks ago, and he has a diabetes magazine. He wanted a partner, and it didn't work out because he wanted to take all the money, which I'm already making, so that doesn't make any sense. He had been told that you needed 50,000 listeners to make money in podcasting. Do you know how many podcasts have 50,000 listeners? Like 2%, maybe. So there's a lot of bad info out there. If you have a general interest podcast, like the movie review thing I was talking about, 5,000 downloads is probably a safe number to try to make some money, because then you will be approached by those more generic podcast companies that want to, the advertisers who want to advertise on podcasting. I think you need 1,000 downloads per episode per week. Per episode after 4 weeks. A lot of you have been in this festival for a long time, so you've heard that. The industry standard is, what does your episode get 4 weeks after it's released? I think if you have 1,000 downloads and you have a niche, you're good to go. I got my first sponsor with 125 downloads per episode per month. Wow, I keep saying per week. I'm so sorry. So that number for me was 125. Now, that's ridiculous. How did that happen? Because I knew them. Because I had already done blogging for them. Because I'd already done some speaking for them. And because the marketing director and I had a very, very good relationship. So it was a really funny situation. This was back in 2015. It was Johnson & Johnson. They make Animas, an insulin pump. And we had already done a lot of business together. And I said, I'm starting this podcast. You guys should be on it. Let's do it. And they said, okay. The marketing director was like, this sounds great. I gave them a very decent rate. Let's go. And we'll talk rates in a minute. But then she got back to me and said, well, as I predicted, the legal department is flipping out. But I told them we have to do it because we already signed the contract. So yay for my marketing person who was really smart and thought this through. And in medical, we had to go through legal, compliance, all of that stuff. I don't want to talk too much about that because it is kind of unique, but I will make a note if we have time at the end to talk about how I serve these sponsors that have compliance and legal issues, because it can be done. You just can't wing it, basically. And then after that, the show picked up and I got more downloads. I average between 2,500 and 3,000 downloads after 4 weeks. I'm really proud of that. Anybody who's in podcasting knows that those are good numbers. If you thought to yourself, ooh, what's she doing? That stinks. Then you just haven't been in podcasting long enough. I'm very happy with that. I love my community. Some of my episodes get 5,000, some don't. It's all good. I average about overall 25 to 30,000 downloads a month. And it's funny because, Brian, I don't know about you, I forgot to factor in YouTube. I put my YouTube, put my show on YouTube with no video because it's a good search engine. And I just passed 100,000 downloads on YouTube after 5 years. So I got 1 million downloads. Yay! I mean, it was just weird to see that happen. Pricing on your episodes. And I'm going really fast, but I want to get all this in so we can get to questions. I don't think anybody should sell their show for less than $100 an episode. That's really high. I don't care. I don't think it's worth it. It's a lot of work. why are you going to do everything I just told you about? Look at all the time you put in, and you're going to sell it for $15 an episode. So what is, if you sell out, if you have 4 episodes, you made $60. That's okay, but it's a lot of work. And now you're working for these companies. These are your clients. You have to take care of them. You don't just sign the contract and forget about them. You have to check in with them. You have to schmooze them. You have to change the copy. You have to do all sorts of things for them. Personally, if you don't want to make money in podcasting, you want to have fun and it's a hobby or it's an extension of your business, I think that's great. I know a lot of people who are really happy with CPM, which is the standard industry stuff where you make something like 15 or 25 or even, I guess, $50 per thousand maybe. But I just think that, to me, $100 was a really good place to start. So lots more to talk about. Brian, take it away.
Sure. So let me let's see, backtrack just a little bit to a couple of the things that Stacy said. She talked about approaching potential sponsors. Remember that some of the potential sponsors that you're going to approach are going to be people who are used to a certain type of salesperson knocking on the door, right? So they're going to be used to most likely a broadcast, radio or television. The salesperson is coming and knocking on the door. So be sure that you've got your presentation buttoned up. That you know what you're talking about. You'll be able to answer the questions that they're going to ask. It's also okay to say, I don't know, but let me find out and I will follow up. And then that gives you a reason to send another email or make another phone call later on and get another touch to someone who might be on the fence about sales. But sales is it's really, really difficult. It takes a certain personality. You have to be able to both not say no or not take no for an answer, but also to be able to take no without getting your feelings hurt. You might throw your line out 100 times and get 99 no's, and for some people that's hard to listen to. But to Stacy's point about broadcast, the salespeople, you want your salespeople to be the wealthiest, most successful people in the building, because when they are, that means that your operation is successful too. So if you have to, or if you're not particularly good about sales, then don't be afraid to bring someone in and ask them to work on a 25% commission, but bring in someone who knows about sales. I personally am not super comfortable selling things to people, so I'm okay with bringing other people in and having them do the sales and then giving them a percentage of what they bring in. So don't be afraid to bring somebody else in. So Stacy mentioned the deck that, or having a deck. Let me show that to you really quickly. This is the, it's called the deck. This is the presentation that I showed to ORTHOCAROLINA when they approached me. So we launched Queen City Podcast Network in March of 2018. And in October of 2018, ORTHOCAROLINA approached me and said, how can we get involved? And I said, I don't know, let me give it some thought. And so we scheduled a meeting for 2 weeks after that initial contact. And I spent that 2 weeks kind of thinking about, what does this presentation look like? And what do these packages look like? We didn't have a whole lot of podcasts at the time. It was still very much in the experimental stage. It was a full year before I intended on reaching out to anyone to try to bring in any advertising. So everything was happening fairly quickly. So I put this deck together. It starts with our mission statement. The mission statement just helps other people kind of understand, what it is that, you're going for. It doesn't have to be super high end. It doesn't have to be this involved. It stated what the goal of the network was. which was really kind of to step into the gap being left by commercial and terrestrial radio, and empowering a diverse lineup of producers and hosts to boldly and creatively generate engaging yada yada yada. Right. So so this was the mission statement that we approached ORTHOCAROLINA with. ORTHOCAROLINA supports a lot of podcasts here in Charlotte, and Blair Primus, who's the marketing director at Ortho, said to me, he said, we don't sponsor things. We invest in people and in ideas. And he liked what we were doing with the network. And so if you find someone, because a lot of selling a podcast is it's kind of innovative. It's still early, right? So you're going to have to latch on to a sponsor who understands what you're doing, who understands what you're trying to accomplish, and is willing to take a little bit of a chance. And so fortunately, ORTHOCAROLINA was willing to invest in what we were trying to achieve in the with the network. At the time, we had two different kinds of podcasts. The legacy podcasts were the original 9 member podcasts that we had at the network. And then the idea at the network was always to create podcasts ourselves, so to create content ourselves. So now we are currently with 8 legacy podcasts and 20 proprietary podcasts that we produce ourselves, and we're about to add another handful of podcasts to the mix as well. So these were the proprietary podcasts, and again, this is just a list of what we had to offer ORTHOCAROLINA, which honestly at this point, we'd only been in operation for 6 months, and we were still very much kind of figuring out what we were as well, and where we were headed. So we just listed what we had, what we were doing. The legacy members at the time, the Charlotte podcast, Cheer Charlotte Radio, you may have seen, the Comics Alternative, which no longer exists, American Timelines, and Charlotte is Creative, which is now called The Biscuit. They want to know where people can hear the podcast, so don't be afraid to tell them, and your potential sponsors may not necessarily know, what a podcast is, how people listen. They may not be podcast listeners themselves. So don't be afraid to take them by the hand and show them what a podcast is and how people listen to it. Then we talked about the partnership structure. So the partnership structure was, we laid out very specifically what we would do for ORTHOCAROLINA as part of the sponsorship. We would produce, manage, distribute, and market legacy and proprietary content, and provide a 10 to 12 second audio ID featuring ORTHOCAROLINA in every QCPN podcast. Right? All of the network podcasts run a 10-second tag that says the Comedy Zone podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network, powered by ORTHOCAROLINA. Find out more at queencitypodcastnetwork.com. Actually, that tag has changed in the last month or so, but that was the original podcast. It was that simple. Literally every single episode of the network mentioned ORTHOCAROLINA. So 70, we were releasing just over 70 episodes a month network-wide at the time. We would provide ORTHOCAROLINA ad availabilities in participating legacy podcasts, provide ORTHOCAROLINA ad availabilities in all proprietary podcasts. So the legacies had the option to run the ORTHOCAROLINA spots or not, but all of the podcasts that were produced by the network would run the ORTHOCAROLINA spots. We would produce ORTHOCAROLINA basically audio commercials in cooperation with the marketing folks at ORTHOCAROLINA. We worked very, very closely with them to produce spots to make sure the messaging was consistent when they had a new endeavor, something new that they wanted to get the word out for. We would change up the content. develop OrthoCarolina ad copy for live reads in appropriate podcasts, produce OrthoCarolina podcasts in cooperation with OrthoCarolina. So Ortho got their own podcast out of the deal. Develop a cooperative social media philosophy and campaigns as appropriate. Provide regular traffic, audience, and listenership reports. We provide quarterly reports to OrthoCarolina to let them know how the network is doing and what they're getting for their dollar. They want to know what they're getting as well as what they're helping to support. The develop events and opportunities to showcase the partnership on a larger scale. We've recorded some panel discussions that Ortho put on. We've appeared at a couple local events with OrthoCarolina, so there's a real opportunity for you to be seen with OrthoCarolina or with your sponsors at events. And finally, provide OrthoCarolina content and links at QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com, which is the network's website. In turn, we asked OrthoCarolina for X amount of dollars a month to the network, according to a negotiated cadence through 2019. That cadence it turned out to be monthly, so we get a check every month from OrthoCarolina. They would provide cross-promotion within appropriate vehicles like social media, marketing, emails, etc. We've been included in their email blasts. They would produce their spots with us. We would develop ad copy for live reads together. We would produce their podcast in cooperation with them. So this is everything that we asked for out of OrthoCarolina as well. And then that's just the umbrella company that runs the Queen City Podcast Network, which is my production company. Because the sponsor wants to know who it is that's doing this. They want to know who they're giving this support to, and does this person know what they're doing, right? So they want to know, are you Joe Blow with a podcast, or are you someone who actually kind of knows what you're doing and has been doing it for a while? So that was the pitch deck that I showed to Ortho. They came back to me 2 weeks later and bought in at the sponsorship level. So, I don't know if it was the deck that did it, if it was just the idea behind it, but they bought into the idea, and they've been supporting us for almost 2 years now. So it's when you approach someone, it helps to have a sense of what you've got. And to Stacy's point, make sure that it's worth it. Ask for $100 an episode. For starters, if your audience isn't that huge, and you're, like for us, our emphasis is on Charlotte. So if you're a Charlotte restaurant and you know that you could reach a few thousand people who live in Charlotte by supporting this podcast network, or supporting a podcast on this network for $100 an episode or $200 an episode, you would probably do that. So I think that there is power behind local, even if you're a podcast that doesn't necessarily have a local focus. If you're produced locally, though, don't be afraid to reach out to someone local. I think you're more likely to get a yes out of Ed's Pine Tree Cafe, I don't know what Ed's Pine Tree Cafe is, but you're more likely to get a smaller sponsorship out of somebody like that than you are by going to Home Depot or Lowe's with $1,000 per 1,000 listens per episode. And once you have a sponsor on board, all of a sudden your show has value, right? And then other potential sponsors see the value in your show, and then they're more likely to buy on board if there's already one person. So get that one sponsorship on board first at whatever it takes, and then try to build from there. Does that make any sense at all, Stacey?
Yeah, it was great. Let me add a couple of quick things, because we had some questions that I think I can kind of roll into some answers here. One question came up: how many, what do you get? What does the sponsor get? And that's important to put in the deck, as Brian did. I keep my deck a little bit more simple, but same exact idea. And what they get on my show, again, I have 4 slots. I also do a pre-roll. So if you want to listen on my show, I know probably nobody here's in the niche, so it's Diabetes Connections. It's easy to find, but I start off with Diabetes Connections is brought to you by blah, 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 blah. We go into the show. I do one spot before the interview, one spot during the interview. After my interview, I have, I call these different things depending on who the sponsors are. I have, and I call these my branded sponsors, these two at the end, because they get a branded segment. I do a Tell Me Something Good, which is for real good foods. And I do an Innovations, which is tips, tricks, and hacks from my listeners. And that's for like Gvoke HypoPen, which is a product. The other two sponsors are called signature sponsors, the before the interview and during the interview. And they pay me the same rate because I rotate them weekly. So then the question came up, and that's what they get. They also get one appearance by me at a diabetes event when I'm speaking, and I'll say, hey, everybody, I'm here because of Dexcom, and they're so great. My son uses them, and we love them. If you have any questions, there's a rep in the back, and then I do my event. That's been challenging because we're not going anywhere, but I've done some Zoom events for them. I had a company ask me about social media, so I did an add-on, and I just made up a price. Now, I put at the end of my deck now, ask me about add-ons, because I am old and don't do tons of social media, but if that's your jam, put it in your deck, offer it to them. And a question was in the chat about, well, how do I know what to charge, or do you show them numbers in CPM? And Brian gives reports. Nobody has ever asked me in the 5 years that I've been doing this how listenership is going. I don't know what's wrong with them, but they don't ask me. And I'm not going to tell them if they're not going to ask me. So and don't give away the store. You don't need to tell people things if they're not asking for them. So what I do is in my deck, it talks about my listenership. It talks about how many people are listening. I do a graph to show, growth year to year. But most of my sponsors, and again, it's different because they are pharma. Johnson & Johnson is not interested in cutting me a check every 2 weeks. They're going to put me in the advertising budget for the year and cut me a check in January. And as long as I don't break my contract, we're good to go. Other sponsors feel the same way. I mean, not every sponsor feels the same way. But you can tell them, I only accept sponsorship in these increments, yearly, quarterly, monthly. If someone says, well, I don't know if I'm going to pay in 10 days, why would you want them as a sponsor if they don't know if they can pay you on Friday? No, thank you. You're allowed to tell them what you want and let them say no. You can always negotiate. It's the same thing with price. I raised my price for 4 years until somebody said no. And all they did was back down from signature to branded. Those are two different price points for me. Yes, I am an LLC. That just came up. I started Stacy Sims Media LLC before I started the podcast. I have a book. I have other business. I do voice work. But I do think it's really great if you want to incorporate. But it also, and this ties into a question that someone asked, what do you do if you're not established? And you don't really have anything to show. If you don't have anything to show and you're not established, it's not time to sell your show. Put some work in. Do a podcast. Create some content. So you don't need to go full bore in with creating a business and cranking out a deck if you haven't launched your episodes yet. If you haven't started a podcast, what makes you think you're going to make it to episode 10? I hope you all do. Let's go for it. I love podcasting. I'm passionate about it. You all know already I'm a little crazy. But don't worry about monetizing if you haven't even started yet. You can put it in the back of your head and kind of get there. But that is not the first thing you should do. The first thing you should do is make it to episode 6. And then you can think about it. CPM can be very helpful for certain shows. Cost per 1,000. I have no idea why it became cost per. I know it's male, I know it's Latin, and it means 1,000. But, we need to speak some English here. So basically what that means is you're looking at your listenership, and for every 1,000 listeners you have, you're going to charge your sponsor a certain amount. And then you start doing math and you start giving reports. Some podcast agencies might want that, and some advertisers who are very, very podcast savvy might want that. But I frankly wouldn't offer it out of the gate. I would say, here are my prices. If you buy for a year, you get a little discount. You buy for 9 months, you get a little less of a discount, and back it off until they're only with you for 3 months. And I'll also tell you, and this is a radio thing, if somebody wants to buy a show for a month, I would really try hard to dissuade them, because you have to hear things over and over again before you see any results. Oh, I never going to run out of time. Brian, I want to make sure to mention affiliate marketing.
Yes.
So this is really popular. I hate it. Affiliate marketing is where someone comes to you and says, we'll give you a promo code. And if your listeners buy stuff from our website using that code, we'll pay you. It can be fabulous. It can be a great way to get started. Here's the pitfall that most of us, including myself, fall into. put it in writing that they will not undercut you. In other words, your discount will always be the biggest discount because people are smart. And if I'm offering a 10% discount for Blue Apron coupons, tickety, tickety, tick, or I have the honey extension, tickety, tickety, tick. And all of a sudden, if Blue Apron is running a 20% promotion every month, what good is my 10% off? So don't get burned on that. You may not be able to get the best affiliate promo code that they offer, but at least ask and push on that, because I think that's a terrible misuse of your time and your service. Maybe you're putting a logo on your website and you make $1.50. All right, I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. I do want to take a minute before we end, Brian, and talk about ethics. Let's just make sure we put 2 minutes.
Ethics, got it. To Stacy's point about affiliate marketing or affiliate agreements. So those are the things you hear. It's Blue Apron. It used to be Amazon. It's Sherry's Berries. It's LegalZoom, right? So you mention them on your podcast, and if someone goes to LegalZoom.com/diabetes connections and makes a purchase there, then you get a small percentage of that purchase, right? So that's an affiliate arrangement. Amazon used to kind of be the biggest one. They would give you 6% of every purchase made, which is great. But it tends, especially for people that come just starting out or sort of on the back end, if you're not Joe Rogan or Adam Carolla, or someone like that. If you think about your Rogan gets 500,000 downloads per episode, and he throws the Amazon link out, and 1% of his audience, that's Stacy. What's 1% of 500,000?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a decent sized number, right? It's 5,000 maybe. Right. So if he throws that line out, 1% of his audience goes to Amazon and makes a purchase. That's thousands of people making purchase. So he's going to make a lot of money off his affiliate arrangement. So affiliate arrangements are great if you've got huge numbers, a lot of work, and then Amazon gets a lot more out of it. If you don't have the huge numbers, because if 1% of my audience goes, it's a much smaller number than Joe Rogan gets. So affiliate arrangements are great in principle. Just kind of watch what you're getting into. All right, Stacy, ethics.
All right, and this is a great question that we got in the chat that comes back to ethics, and that is, should I pay to be on somebody's podcast? This person said, I was asked to pay to be on a podcast. And generally speaking, a lot of us with radio and news backgrounds especially recoil in horror from that. Like, oh my God, that's the worst. I can't believe that. But you know what? I've kind of come around on that, in that a lot of entrepreneurial shows will ask for a fee to be on the show. Now, I don't do that. That's not my deal at all. But I think the answer really has to be that it depends. Now, to lead into ethics, and I've never paid to be on anybody else's podcast, and I can't see doing that. But if, you have to, again, work backwards from, why am I doing this, right? What's the point? And gosh, I hope I said that at the beginning. That's one of the first things you should be asking before you launch your podcast is, why am I doing this? And this, you don't have to tell anybody, but be really honest. Are you doing it for fun, to try to make money, to use a new skill, because you're bored, because you have a big ego, because you need to talk to somebody who left your radio station job and now you're talking to the walls and your car and your dog? And, so there's lots of reasons to start a podcast. Be honest with yourself. You can tell the world whatever you want, but make sure you know why you started it. But ethically, to me, it's all about disclosures. And that goes to, are you paying to be a guest on somebody's podcast? If I've been listening to a podcast for 3 years, and then I find out through some other means that they've been charging their guests to appear, that changes entirely my thinking of this show. It doesn't mean it's terrible, but it means it's changed. So if you're going to do something like that, you need to disclose. And it's the same thing for any bit of sponsorship. Make sure you have a disclosure on your website. Maybe it's at the very end of your show. If you're doing an entertainment show, this is a lot less important. What I mean by disclosures is, I'll give you me as the example again. With type 1 diabetes, I'm taking money from people that helping keep my listeners alive. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And my son uses some of the technology, but I decided early on that we would not take any product for free, which is different than a lot of people do with these. They'll say, oh, we'll just send you some stuff or whatever. But I wanted to be able to pivot quickly and use different products if they weren't working for my son. And that was important to me. I don't care if Real Good Foods is going to send me a frozen pizza, but if you're going to send me, a continuous glucose monitor and I don't like it, or it's giving him a rash, I better be able to change it out. So my listeners know, because I tell them, that the advertisers are paying for the commercial time. They're not telling me what to say. They are not asking me to give reviews. We stick to the spots in my show, and my listeners know that. Everybody is different, but to me, it's extremely important to decide in advance what your ethical decisions are going to look like. Because let's say you actually become successful and people are throwing money at you and they want you to talk for them and they want you to take advertising for them. It's really hard, and I think we all fall into this trap once we do it, to take money from someone and then be objective, right? And again, it's a little different, but I interview these companies all the time and I interview their competitors all the time. And so whenever I do that, I have to make sure to mention, look, we're having Dexcom on the show. They don't tell me what to say, you know that, but they are an advertiser, and go from there. Also, if there's something that you don't believe in and you take money from it and then you're talking about them, I don't know how you sleep at night. Good for you. I couldn't do it. When I was at WBT, we were allowed to give, first refusal. Do you not want to do this? Do you think these guys are shysters? Do you think they're great? And I would not take certain ads. So I hope you all get into that position that you're turning things down, but it is something really important to think about, because at the end of the day, all you really have is yourself and your word, and your listeners need to, and this, we say that in podcasting a lot, they need to know, like, and trust you. And if you're just a shill, how can they trust you? And they certainly aren't going to like you. So anymore, it's funny, I'm seeing the chat go by. I'm just making sure I'm not missing too many questions.
I got a few, yeah. To Stacy's point as well, there are also some legal considerations when it comes to not mentioning someone who's paid to be on your show. So make sure on Wednesday that you catch Landis Wade's presentation about legal considerations in podcast. I'm sure that he will address that in his podcast as well. Stacy, Chris Ruffin Jr. wants to know if it's possible to have too many sponsors.
It is very possible to have too many sponsors. You do not want to sound like, all you have is spots in your show. So again, I think it's important to think this through and think about what kind of show you have and think about where you're going to put them. At WBT, we had some incredibly, I think it was for every hour, we had something like 22 minutes of commercials. It was brutal. It was brutal. And we got away with it. But I think you'll figure out pretty quickly what feels good to you. If you have someone asked me this in the chat, how long is the show? My show is approximately 45 to 60 minutes a week. It changes just because the interview length changes. But I think that if you have a show that's less than 45 minutes long, it's really hard to put 4 good spots in there. And that's really your limit. But that's me. The answer with podcasting is always, it depends. How skillful are you? How flexible are your sponsors? Again, I meant to come back to this. For my medical sponsors, what I do is I literally write out 6 to 8 commercials for them, send it off to legal. We get them approved for the year, because then I can at least sound a little spontaneous and switch them out. But for my non-medical stuff, you can have fun. You can be funny. You can talk about personal experiences, things like that. And it's a lot more easy on the ear. Let's put it that way. It's hard to get creative when you're worried about legal and compliance, but it really helps me to sound like there's a variety and to make my sponsors happy. They love that. So I think if you have a lot of sponsors, a lot of spots in your show, a lot of commercials, you have to work really hard to keep your listeners' attention. Otherwise, you're just going to sound terrible. And somebody asked, what order? The higher, think about it, the closer to the top, the more valuable those spots are. If I'm an advertiser, I've heard people do the post roll. Who the hell is buying post roll? Who's listening all the way to the end of the show? I'm sorry if you sell that, Brian, but I mean, who is buying that? Because, you get to the goodbyes and everybody's gone. You can see it, we'd like to thank our, So it's beginning is the best. You can get creative and do it, like make it up, do what I did, and rotate those 2 signature sponsors so that they pay the same rate, but they're flipping around. Yes, I do list sponsors on my website, and they pay more to be in my newsletter. So everybody gets a spot on the website. I let 2 in the 2 signature sponsors gets a spot in the newsletter. I'm lost the ability to speak. And somebody asked about my book, so I can hit my book. All right, The World's Worst Diabetes Mom is my book, and it's for parents of children with type 1 diabetes. Diabetes Awareness Month is coming up. Have me on your podcast. We'll have fun.
A couple more things, and I misspoke earlier. The legal considerations for a podcast session is actually Tuesday night, so tomorrow night with Landis Wade tomorrow night. So if you're going to register for that one, go to charlottepodcastfestival.com and register for that session there. The other thing I want to mention, if you haven't launched your podcast yet, and you may someday have the intention of the seeking of sponsorships, what I've done from day one that I started producing audio content on the internet, and this goes back to like 2001, so this goes back a long way, is I built a break into every single episode of every single show. Even if I didn't use it, if I just use it to promote other shows or to promote something else or whatever, I built in that break already. And if it was an hour-long show, I built in 2 breaks. And I did that to condition your listeners to expecting a break or 2 in the middle of your show. Because if you go a year or 2 years without getting any sponsorships, and then all of a sudden, you start taking a break and inserting a sponsorship, your audience is going to flip out. So make sure that your shows right out of the gate are already structured to support advertising breaks. And then it'll be a much easier transition for your audience to go, oh, that's, a break that was always here anyway. So they're not going to accuse you of selling out and all that other stuff. So just build it in from day one. And then if you don't have advertising, you can always use those breaks to promote your back episodes, to promote future things, to promote other things that you're working on. So you use that for your own purposes up until the point where you get advertising. Stacy, we're out of time.
This was awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for letting me talk about this. I like to keep it real, like a lot of you have said, because I felt like there was not a resource like this when I started out, and there was a lot of amorphous, make a thing and charge a thing. And it really helped me to be specific, and I don't mind sharing those numbers with you all. So thanks. You were an awesome audience and had great questions.
Stacy, where can folks find you on the social medias?
Oh, I'm Stacy Sims everywhere. It's STACEYSIMMS. Oh, I shouldn't say everywhere. There's no way I'm on TikTok or Snapchat. I'm also Diabetes Connections. And if you just Google, diabetes podcasting, you will find me.
All right. Stacy, thank you so much for your expertise and your time. It was a lot of fun. And it was fun finally getting to work with you on something.
I know. It's so fun, Brian. We've known each other forever.
That was very exciting. Thanks a lot, Stacy.
Thank you.
As for us, QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com if you're interested in what's going on at the network. There's still a week of free podcast sessions and panels taking place during the Charlotte Podcast Festival. Check out the full list of sessions the rest of the week and register for the ones that stand out to you at charlottepodcastfestival.com. Don't forget to pick up a t-shirt if you like at charlottepodcastfestival.com. Either if you like us, use the hashtag CLT Podcast Fest as well, CLT Podcast Fest. By the way, the t-shirts are locally printed by a vendor right here in Charlotte. So, we're not going with Vistaprint or anyone like that. We're keeping it here at home for the t-shirts at charlottepodcastfestival.com. Also, don't forget the final happy hour of the festival, Friday at 6 p.m. Mix and mingle with other podcasters from around the world. You can register for that as well at charlottepodcastfestival.com. Thanks again for attending today's session. My name is Brian. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you and at your podcast and at the sessions the rest of the week. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.